A time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
In the back when times, war was coming. Not war like the petty tribal skirmishes in southwestern Utah and throughout the Midwest. Not war like the clash between the bull and the bear over the Hoover Dam, or the power struggles in Boston, or the occupation of the tattered remains of D.C. They say war never changes, but in spite of all the warning signs, the evaporation of fossil fuels and rampant starvation across the globe, nobody was prepared for the scale of the war that was bubbling under the surface. On October 23, 2077, at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the world cracked open. Nuclear fire rained down from the skies above as nuclear bomb after nuclear bomb hammered the earth. The Great War, humanity's greatest and most terrible accomplishment, engulfed the world in a radioactive inferno for just 2 hours, and humanity was wiped out. Well, almost. Humans are the smartest animals on the planet, and while some were using that brain power to annihilate our species, others use that power to preserve our species. Rumors circulate of an eccentric billionaire in Nevada who predicted that the Great War was inevitable 15 years before the bombs dropped, and spent his fortune preparing for this eventuality. Not only working to preserve himself, but the city he loved, Las Vegas. He was a laughingstock of his peers at the time, lambasted and lampooned in all the swanky parties and magazines. But on that day, when 77 warheads came to demolish his city, well, that's a story for another day. For as wealthy and powerful as this billionaire was, his mind was of a singular purpose, and there were other men out there with more ambition, men whose vision expanded beyond preserving and controlling one tiny corner of a war-blasted country. These men, whose names have been lost so far to the ravages of time, came together to found a company that would inevitably and irreversibly shape the course of humanity for hundreds of years. And this company was Vault-Tec. If you're listening to this, you've likely seen the handiwork of Vault-Tec yourself. They built the vaults, the giant complexes constructed out of reinforced concrete several feet thick, embedded in the sides of mountains or deep underground, and sealed shut with giant steel doors. Either you're one of the lucky, or perhaps unlucky few who survived the war due to their handiwork. Either that, or you've taken refuge from the savage burn of radiation storms inside their halls, or you've seen a stranger wearing a blue jumpsuit with a number on the back out in the wilds. It's not fully known precisely how many vaults were built. Every vault constructed by Vault-Tec is numbered, and while our archives are incomplete, records show numbers as high as 118. While only 41 vaults are known at the moment, new records are discovered every day in computers buried under radioactive ash. Some even say there are vaults numbering as high as 700, but official corroborations are unconfirmed, as all known references to vaults higher than 118 are within Vault-Tec training simulations. The purpose of the vaults on the surface was simple: to provide a safe haven from the ravages of war for humanity to survive in, so that they may one day return to the surface and reform society. Unlike the cheaper, single-occupancy Pulaski preservation shelters that dot New England, that did little more than shield you from shrapnel, vaults were to be fully enclosed, self-sufficient towns where tens or even hundreds of people could live. Hydroponics and UV lamps provided all the vitamins and minerals you could need by growing fresh produce. Advanced water filters and recycling systems provided fresh water to residents. There were common areas, cafeterias, schools, doctors' offices, and recreation, weapons, and construction equipment. everything a human needs to not only live, but to thrive. Vaults were even to be equipped with a coveted Garden of Eden creation kit, which contains all the seeds, fertilizer, and equipment one would need to restart society once the earth above cooled to a dull radioactive glow. This mandate to preserve humanity against the onslaught of nuclear terror was encapsulated in Vault-Tec's corporate slogan, revolutionizing safety for an uncertain future. Construction costs for one vault cost over $500 billion pre-war dollars, and entry into them wasn't cheap. Exact costs of entry are unknown, but waiting lists were long, and many occupants had to win a lottery to get in, or be a service member of the armed forces. The founding members of Vault-Tec were among the few to see the inevitable on the horizon, and they took action to both profit and take control of the ever-rising tensions and fear of the coming apocalypse. And while most people were skeptical, many embraced the perception of safety that Vault-Tec offered them, a safe haven away from rad scorpions, super mutants, and rabid dissident tribes. The Vault waitlists filled up with names of people looking to preserve themselves, and Vault-Tec gladly took their money, but they were all of them deceived, for lurking under that friendly motto, revolutionizing safety for an uncertain future, lay a secret agenda. Vault-Tec didn't just want to get rich. They wanted far, far more, and they got it. And thousands of humans who were just looking for a safe place, hopped out of the nuclear frying pan and into the vile, deceitful fire of Vault-Tec's claws. The real plan of Vault-Tec was not to simply provide a safe haven for humanity to wait out the horrors above ground. Instead, it was to use the vaults and their controlled environments as a canvas upon which to run a series of experiments, some seemingly innocuous, and others downright evil by the judgment of any religion known to man. While there were a few vaults known as control vaults that actually held up to Vault-Tec's advertising, the vast majority of vaults existed solely to test the limits of the human psyche, human sociology, and human physiology. In fact, Vault 15, the most famous vault in America, the vault whose inhabitants created the settlement Shady Sands, where one day President Tandy was born, who later went on to found and strengthen the new California Republic, was one of these experimental vaults, designed to test the limits of humanity's tolerance for cohabiting with people of violently opposing ideologies. The vault was populated with political and religious extremists, and while some of these residents went on to do incredible things in Shady Sands and the NCR, the vast majority of residents gave in to the darker urges and formed three gangs: the Vipers, the Jackals, and, most infamously, the Khans, and they went on to cause trouble for citizens and tribes in the western United States for generations. Compared to this experiment, though, a relative success, the other experiments conducted by Vault-Tec were pointlessly cruel, bordering on insane. While our records are incomplete and new details are coming in every day from uncovered archives, this is what we know so far. Of all the regions in our databases, the most complete information comes from the southwestern United States, which makes sense because, well, I'll get to that another day. While the vaults were created with the presupposition of safety from radiation and nuclear fire, Vault 12 had a different plan entirely: to test the effects of radiation on live test subjects. The seal and safe vault door model number 343 in this location was designed with a fatal flaw: it wouldn't close properly. As a result, radiation from the outside in the form of irradiated ash and dust crept into the vault over time. Luckily, or perhaps unluckily, the inhabitants survived, in a sense. They transformed into ghouls, half-dead, half-living byproducts of radiation that resemble zombies from the old pre-war moving pictures. Most of them retained their sanity and went on to found Necropolis, the city of the dead, in Southern California. The residents of Vault 13 weren't so lucky. Information is sparse, but records say that the vault was meant to stay closed for 200 years in order to study the results of human isolation. This didn't quite go to plan, however, as the water chip installed in the unit was rated to only last a few decades, requiring replacement sometime in the 2160s. Rumor has it, a certain vault dweller was selected by Vault 13's overseer to retrieve a replacement chip once several others failed to locate one, which they did, but not before getting dragged into a conflict with the super mutants and their master, which is, well, let's not get off track. Not much is known about the resident of Vault 13 after the conclusion of the war with the Master, but rumors circulate that they were personally responsible for saving the life of President Tandy of the NCR, and were later banished from Vault 13, and later went on to found the city of Arroyo, and sired another influential wastelander who went on to do great things. Scavengers in the area say they saw vertibirds and heard gunfire near the entrance to Vault 13 years later, but little more is known about the fate of those residents. Vault 19 was among the more simple experiments into human psychology. What happens when you arbitrarily divide people into two separate but equal groups? Unfortunately, like many Vault experiments, we have no answer to this question. Extraction of local terminal entries implies that tensions between the two groups were high, and paranoia was rampant among the occupants. It's unknown what effect the subterranean sulfur caves and their gases may have had on the residents, but most of the data, aside from several paranoid ramblings, are corrupted. As of now, the vault is completely unoccupied and appears to be abandoned, and as a result, makes a great potential hiding place for men on the wrong side of the lawman. The last vault in the West we have information on is the most tragic. Vault 11 was designed to test the wisdom and dedication to morality of mankind when given the most extreme incentive. Every year, a new overseer was elected by the vault residents. However, unlike every other vault in the United States, this overseer wasn't in charge of the day-to-day operations of the vault. Instead, they had one purpose: to die. Every year, one person was chosen to be killed. Residents were meant to do this, or else face total annihilation. Eventually, however, the residents decided they'd had enough, and after many, many years of sending friends, loved ones, and neighbors down to be sacrificed, they decided they'd rather die than kill another resident. Upon choosing mercy for the overseer, the vault played a pre-programmed message congratulating the residents on their fortitude in the face of adversity. They were spared and never had to kill anybody for all those decades. The weight of this revelation was too much for the residents of Vault 11, and all but one man killed themselves rather than face the horrors of what they'd done. As was all too common with Vault Tech's experiments on the psychology of mankind, Vault 11 left no survivors. Our records for the rest of the West and Midwest are incomplete, but moving over to New England, the malice of Vault Tech continued into the higher-numbered vaults, with vaults like Vault 101, which were meant to test both how people would thrive under a dictatorial overseer and for extended times of exclusion, but the vault commanded to stay shut for an eternity. There are rumors that this vault has in fact opened more than once even, and that some of its residents have left to do great things in the capital wasteland of D.C., but the exact exploits of this individual are unconfirmed. Vault 92 served as a testbed for what was called subliminal suggestion. The vault was populated with world-renowned musicians who were subjected to constant white noise with implanted suggestions. Instead of creating an army of super soldiers, however, these experiments created an army of madmen who eventually murdered all of the other residents in the vault. Nobody in the vault survived this riot, and the halls of the vault lie as a testament to the failures of Vault Tech, although it's reported that it makes an excellent place for mirelurks to nest. Vault 95, meanwhile, was populated entirely with drug addicts, save for one lone Vault Tech employee. At first, things went well, and through collective group therapy and rehabilitation, all of the residents kicked their addictions. But 5 years after the vault was sealed, a hidden cache of powerful drugs was unlocked. Chaos erupted in the vault, with all residents either succumbing to overdoses or to the fists and bullets of their drug-addled friends. There's nothing there but dust now. Vault 75 could be summarized in one word: eugenics. All Vault residents over the age of 18 were executed by Vault-Tec staff, while the children were subjected to vicious tests and torture. This is all we know, as with most vaults, the records have rotted away and the residents are gone. Maybe it's better that way. These are just some of the most documented and most horrific experiments conducted by Vault-Tec, but dozens and possibly hundreds of other vaults are out there in the wastes, tempting all manner of wastelanders with promises of unspoilt goods from the time before the bombs dropped. But be warned, many of these vaults remain as unsafe now as they were the day they were created. There's rumors of vaults out there that still contain people from before the Great War, frozen in cryogenic storage to test the limits of human preservation. Vaults filled with vicious super mutants as a remnant of long-forgotten pre-war government experiments, or even a vault rumored to contain dozens of virtual reality computers where the residents want for nothing and live in peaceful tranquility in a perfect virtual world. We don't know why Vault-Tec betrayed public trust. Some say it was to find the limits of human psychology, sociology, and physiology, so that they could leave this scorched earth for the stars above. Or maybe it was pure malice or hubris created by those driven mad at the prospect of life as they knew it being under threat from nuclear annihilation. Whichever the case, the vaults exist, with reports pouring in every week of new ones. The most recent batch out of what used to be known as West Virginia, where it said there are thousands of super geniuses that roam the wastes looking for glory. If you're hearing this message, be careful. The creators of Vault-Tec may be dead, but their legacy is still alive. Some even say that Vault-Tec has ties to remnant pre-war government agents, a faction known as the Enclave that patrols the wastes occasionally in advanced power armor never before seen, abducting wastelanders for testing purposes, never to be seen again. But that is a story for another day.
Look, I know I haven't been around much lately. Truth be told, I miss you terribly. Aside from Edna, you're the closest thing I have to friends in this world. What? To you, this is just a bookshelf. But to me, Shelley's more valuable than all the gold in the Sierra Madre. It's her name, so what? As a data procurement specialist, it has been my duty and privilege to catalog the wasteland. It's what gives my life meaning, purpose. I do it for the Brotherhood, sure, but I also do it for the people. It's my belief that stories can literally save lives, and I want to spread my stories to as many wastelanders as I can. Truth is, it's been rather difficult. I've been thrown out of bars from Reno to Dallas, from Diamond City to Vault City. I guess I just rubbed people the wrong way. One kid even drew something inappropriate on Edna while I wasn't looking. I won't lie to you. After a lifetime of rejection, I was tempted to just give up. But information is power. I'm determined to equip the inhabitants of the wasteland with what it needs to fight back.
Behold, the Wastelander's Codex. It's a collection of practically everything I've collected over the years. Think of it as a wasteland encyclopedia, filled with information on nearly every topic imaginable. The database itself is quite extensive. A wealth of history from both before and after the war.
Poseidon Energy was incontestably the most powerful energy conglomerate on Earth prior to the Great War.
I've also included some basic intel on the wasteland's many groups and communities.
The history of the children of Adam is tied closely to the history of Megaton.
And I'm confident the bestiary section of my codex will prove useful when dealing with the wasteland's more dangerous inhabitants.
In China, Yao Guai was the name given to malevolent animal spirits, a suitable name for the creature that appears before you now.
Knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice. Consider this codex our gift to the wasteland, Shelley. For yours is the gift that keeps on giving.
Hello Fallout fans, how you been? This update video was originally planned for September, but the people of the world can agree that nature's been a bitch lately. We had a Category 5 hurricane sent towards our homes. Luckily, we Floridians are pretty used to this kind of thing, so everyone chipped in with the cleanup, right down to some chainsaw-wielding nuns. So yeah, in celebration of our survival against nature, the guys and I have some exciting little tidbits of news, including an update on our up-and-coming fan project. First up though, in our continuing mission to bring the love of lore to the masses, the Storyteller team has recently partnered with Dante Modding and members of the Vault Wiki to bring Fallout its very own in-game lore codex. If you've ever played other popular RPGs like, say, Mass Effect or The Witcher, you'll know exactly what we're going for here. The ultimate goal is to create a fully voiced codex entry for every notable creature, faction, and location found in Fallout, with each entry being unlocked as you explore the wasteland. The beta version of the mod is actually available today for Fallout 4, yours to download for only 500 Creation Club points. No, I'm just messing with you, it's free, it'll always be free, and it's available on the Nexus and BethesdaNet for both PC and Xbox One. Sadly, Sony's restrictions makes a mod like this impossible if we port it over to that console as well. Quick disclaimer, what's available today is the beta, so only the bestiary category of the codex is unlockable at this time. We have plans to steadily add more and more unlockable codex entries over time, so make sure to keep updates enabled on the mod. Links in the description. Alright, now, let's talk about Fallout Brotherhood. If you've been keeping up with the Shoddycast, you'll know the bulk of our time in recent months has been completely monopolized by this rather unique fan project of ours, Fallout Brotherhood. Since our last update video, we've completed some additional animations and creature design. We've also had the privilege of casting some incredible voice talent for the project, including none other than Mark Meer, aka Commander Shepard from the Mass Effect franchise. Yeah, turns out Commander Shepard is a Storyteller fan, so getting him to be the voice of Roger Maxson in a military-centric storyline, just too perfect. And the good news doesn't stop there, because this somewhat ambitious fan project of ours recently got a little more ambitious. Thanks to a flood of renewed interest after our last update video dropped, we caught the attention of enough people in the Fallout modding community to expand Fallout Brotherhood into a fully playable quest mod. Back in August, we released a detailed video on Patreon explaining all the specifics on this, but I'll just briefly recap here for everyone else without nerding out too much on the technicals. Through some rather clever tinkering in the Creation Kit, the Creation Kit being the tool used to create Fallout 4, our more tech-savvy modding volunteer managed to crack the code used in Fallout 4's Memory Den. You remember the Memory Den. It's the place where we encountered that really well-scripted event in Fallout 4's main questline, the part where we took a walk through a dead man's memories. It was probably Bethesda's best storytelling moment in Fallout 4. So, more than a few of us were disappointed that the memory loungers were rarely used after that. Here's this amazing piece of technology in Fallout's universe that allows the player to experience simulated memories, and the sole survivor really only uses it once or twice himself. The player doesn't get to spend much time reliving memories from before the Great War, which felt like a missed opportunity for many of us lore enthusiasts out there. Well, with some help from the Fallout modding community, we are going to try and remedy that. We've been able to create a custom memory den sequence, tailor-made for the sole survivor. The premise is that the storyteller will use the in-game memory loungers to render events from before the Great War, such as the events of Mariposa and the founding of the Brotherhood of Steel. This quest will ultimately allow the player to take a walk through history, as it were, experiencing the events of the Mariposa Rebellion for themselves. And the best part is that we're getting the mechanics of the simulation to work almost exactly like it does in the original Kellogg sequence. Making a playable version of Fallout Brotherhood is proving not only possible, but incredibly cool, since the work now being done on this project is a lot more involved than a basic machinima. Fallout Brotherhood will take much longer to roll out than we originally had planned for, but once the quest is finished, it'll be made available for both PC and Xbox One. If you're playing Fallout on PS4, don't panic. While your console of choice does not allow for these kinds of quest mods, we still have plans to release a movie version of the mod once it is finished. So yes, that's what's been going on with the Storyteller team behind the scenes, but enough about mods. Now that community modders like Anoctium have mostly taken the torch on Fallout Brotherhood, some of us on the Storyteller team suddenly find ourselves with a little free time on our hands, and rather than spend that free time with family or friends, we're gonna make internet videos. A couple of us took a poll on Patreon recently where we shared our ideas for upcoming lore videos about topics that we care about. Our Caesar video was actually a reaction to that poll, and as a result, it became our most shared video of the past 365 days, which is awesome. I think we're going to be diving further into the more cerebral and philosophical parts of our favorite games and characters. It's an aspect of lore we haven't covered really yet. So yes, keep your eyes peeled for more nerdy crap like that in the coming months. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to keep up with the cast, the best way to do that is, I guess, by belling us here on YouTube, or, you could just follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I've been Josh. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later. After it was a sure thing that America could wipe out a city with just one bomb, a scientist turned to Father and said, "Science has now known sin." And do you know what Father said? He said, "What is sin?"
The discovery of the atomic bomb in the 1940s has given humanity a question the Fallout series has strived to answer. If ever there would come a day when mankind possessed the capacity to destroy himself, what would come of us? Some predict that this is where our story will end. Yet what if it was only another bloody chapter of human history? You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning. Change comes to all nations. In the early 20th century, the great powers of the old world thought that their rule would never end. The Tsars of Russia met their downfall at the hands of a bloody revolution. Western Europe fought a great war against fascists who sought to build a Reich that would last 1,000 years. It crumbled in less than a decade. The Japanese believed their imperial rule was eternal, yet they were the first to have their pride seared away by atomic fire. The United States of America emerged as the world's great power by the 1950s. Vast nuclear arsenals ensured that open warfare was a thing of the past, and soon after, America entered a Cold War with their enemies. It was a long, uneasy peace, a perpetual status quo as though the world were freeze-dried and sealed in a vault for a century. Those wandering the wasteland today might find it hard to believe that only 200 years ago, the richest nation in the world existed here. No death claws, no super mutants, no ghouls. Most folk back then didn't have to fight for survival or scavenge supplies.
Factories produced everything a person could want by the millions. Walking into a store with a stack of paper money, they could buy as much food, ammo, or clothing as they could carry. In fact, the biggest problem people faced was finding a place to keep it all. Highways stretched 3,000 miles from coast to coast, with roadside diners selling fresh burgers made from something the old world called a cow. Riding in gas-guzzling Chrysler cars and drinking ice-cold soda pop, the Americans enjoyed their prosperity for generations, secure in their belief that their way of life would never alter, that they would never be forced to evolve. Change came slowly at first, and it was welcomed. People weren't satisfied just having a house where fresh water came right out of a pipe in the wall. No, they wanted more. Always more. They wanted robots to do their work for them, and they needed electronic computers to do their thinking for them. Companies like Robco filled the demand for domestic robots so that citizens didn't have to lift a finger. A robotic Mr. Handy could walk the dog, do the laundry, and watch over the kids too, leaving mom and dad free to spend an evening on the town, or to watch the latest show on the old Radiation King television set. Of course, all these newfangled technological wonders needed power to run. Gasoline had been plentiful for over 100 years, but the earth had started to run dry by the middle of the 21st century. More and more of the power came from atomic energy, and thanks to companies like General Atomics, there were atoms to spare for decades to come. Cities lit up, robots kept on humming, and computer monitors kept glowing. Some factories even started turning out atomic-powered cars with fuel cells that still have some juice in them today. So don't go using those rusted old Corvegas for target practice. Factories churned out toys for the kids, teddy bears, tricycles, and comic books by the ton. Dad could mix his rum with a bottle of Nuka-Cola, and Mom had new spring fashions every year. Shelves were filled with snack cakes, canned meats, and sugar-coated cereals. All of it pumped full of preservatives so that it would stay fresh forever, and Mom wouldn't have to take so many trips to the grocery store. When it came to consumption, the Americans were the best. Yet, even with the increased use of atomics, there wasn't enough energy for the billions of people across the world. Oil was more precious than ever, and the petroleum-rich countries of the Middle East sold their dwindling supplies at ever higher prices. Eventually, the wells ran dry in most of the world. The uranium mines were scraped clean, but no one wanted to give up their shiny new technology. Change had come, and with it, war. The Middle East could have used their limited uranium stock to power reactors for a few decades, but instead, they squandered it on weapons to settle old scores. The European Commonwealth had been proud of how they had joined together in one glorious unified state, but it didn't take long before they turned on each other, scrambling for the last drops of oil within their borders. Alaska, with its abundance of natural resources, remained the source of America's power, and the only place on Earth where oil still flowed. The far-off territory was a tempting target for a desperate China. The Americans foresaw invasion and fortified Alaska, but nothing could deter China from capturing Anchorage. With the two remaining superpowers at war, Canada was trapped in the middle and soon annexed by their neighbors to the south. Allegedly, this was so that the entire continent could be one continuous nation allied against the Chinese invaders. But Canadians viewed it as a ruthless bid for America to retain control of the world's remaining oil supply. The resource wars had come to American soil. In a resource war, the winner will always be the side that fights most efficiently. China used the greatest minds of the East to create stealth technology that allowed their recon teams to infiltrate and assassinate while remaining completely undetected, taking down high-value targets with a single shot. America had its own brand of eccentric genius. With the power of the atom at hand, unbridled American engineers created scientific marvels the rest of the world couldn't have imagined. The glut of consumer electronics that had flooded American stores were only the beginning of the wonders created by the likes of Robco and Poseidon Energy, whose true focus was the development of new weapons that could replace the inefficient tools of warfare used in past decades. Combat robots, energy weapons, and cybernetics entered the war as America sought to retake Anchorage. Battles were fought by daring men who fire nuclear warheads from shoulder-mounted crossbows. Cyber dogs with the brain of a loyal hound encased in an unyielding titanium body. Even robot butlers hovered across battlefields, armed with plasma guns and flamethrowers. There was even a plan to engineer a new breed of mutant super soldiers, but it was the creation of power armor that ensured American victory. Power armor combined the mobility of an infantry soldier with the resilience of a tank and the firepower of an entire squad. Fueled by microfusion cells, these elite troops could inflict crippling strikes on Chinese military assets using a fraction of the resources of conventional military units. Early models of power armor were devastating enough, but after a decade of refinement, the T-51B power armor represented the height of pre-war combat technology. With the aid of these perfected armored suits, America quickly liberated their territory from the Chinese. In the modern day, the T-51B has become a symbol of the Brotherhood of Steel, but centuries ago, it was the final majestic icon of American exceptionalism. By autumn of 2077, the overt conflicts in the Pacific were finished, and most Americans were so tired after a decade of war that they genuinely believed peace had arrived. The paranoid, or perhaps just perceptive, began stocking their bomb shelters, knowing that China would not simply slink away across the ocean in defeat. A final confrontation was coming. In an effort to preserve at least part of humanity from the inevitable end that approached, a secret enclave of America's elite set about ensuring survival at all costs. Victory? Rebuilding? No longer viable options. Their full intent is lost to history, but documented plans include taking refuge within a mountain or an oil rig, and even launching a ship into space to find a new planet to colonize. The modern enclave claimed to be the descendants of that last group of America's elite. That might be true, although many residents of the wasteland would argue that it takes more than a flag and a squadron of vertibirds to be a government of the people. Regardless of whether or not the enclave's claims are true, the majority of America's population did not have access to offshore bases or secret mountaintop fortresses. Fortunately for 100,000 of them, the Vault-Tec Corporation provided access to radiation-proof shelters that could each keep about 1,000 people safe while waiting for conditions on the surface to calm down. Nowhere near enough to save everyone, but it offered hope and kept the public from panicking. On October 23, 2077, alarms rang across the United States, signaling an attack. There had been plenty of false alarms and training drills over the years, and it isn't hard to imagine war-weary citizens shrugging their shoulders and going on with their day, unaware that this was really the apocalypse they had feared. Perhaps people laughed when they saw their neighbors racing to Vault-Tec facilities. The lucky and privileged few who had been assigned a place within one of the vaults might have felt silly when the massive doors rolled shut, but they were among the tiny fraction of humanity that could still feel anything at all when the bombs landed. Historians still don't know much about what happened outside the vaults that day. People weren't concerned with writing in their journals. Hard as it is to believe, there are still ways to hear first-hand accounts of the pre-war times. The sources aren't exactly reliable, though. A few rotten old ghouls claim to have been alive back then. Most of them are just telling tales, hoping to get someone to talk with them for a while. There are a few scientists who managed to preserve their brains in jars before the war, too. Some of those old brains are still alive today and might be able to discuss the old days, assuming that any of them are still sane after being a disembodied brain for 2 centuries. The right medical equipment has kept at least one person alive since before the war. Trouble is, a man with that kind of will to live isn't going to take chances by chatting with strangers. Knowing how people lived before the war can help the wasteland tremendously. Scavengers and research teams dig up all sorts of things that can't be identified. Any rusty old box could hold an ancient secret to providing clean water, or fresh food, or limitless electricity to the wasteland. At the very least, the modern world could learn from the mistakes of the past. The Americans never truly believed that their way of life could come to such an abrupt end. But change comes to all nations, to all people, all ways of life. The only constant in man's struggle for survival is war. Because war never changes. The discovery of the atomic bomb in the 1940s has given humanity a question the Fallout series has strived to answer. If ever there would come a day when mankind possessed the capacity to destroy himself, what would come of us? Some predict that this is where our story will end. Yet what if it was only another bloody chapter of human history? You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning.
This presentation brought to you by Vault-Tec. Here's what you need to know about leaving the vault. Be sure to remember these basic rules. Rule number 1, line up in an orderly fashion. Rule number 2, use protective eyewear. Years of living in the vault can make the eyes sensitive to natural sunlight. Without protective eyewear, extreme eye damage could result. Once outside the vault, be prepared to live life anew with help from the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, or GEC. Use the GEC to create the new world you've been waiting for. Results may vary.
Tamriel.
On October 23, 2077, the nightmares became all too real when the Great War commenced. Blinding light ignited the sky, and people ducked and took cover as they had been taught, cowering under whatever they could, hoping that if they kept their eyes closed and remained still, that the merciless flames would pass them by. They hid beneath desks at school, under cars on the street, and behind desks at work. Perhaps a few were in their beds when the flash appeared on the horizon, and perhaps they drew their blankets over their head like children, hoping that the searing pain was just a bad dream. The ballyhooed tactic of duck and cover proved ineffective against armies that no longer cared about winning. Mutually self-assured destruction was the goal, and the American and Chinese exceeded it in spades. Hundreds of millions of people lost their lives within minutes, and billions more died over the days to come as radioactive fallout settled over entire continents. The fallout muddied the oceans, clouded the sky, and sunk deep into the soil. Those who happened to be in the right place at the moment the bombs fell managed to survive. These lucky few formed the primitive tribal societies that struggled for survival in the years immediately following the war. Hidden from those tribal bands were another group of survivors, those who had been selected for Project Safe House. 100,000 people fortunate enough to have been offered shelter inside impregnable survival shelters called vaults, created by the Vault-Tec Corporation. The first vaults opened again a few years after the war, and their inhabitants slowly spread throughout the wasteland. By now, tales of the vaults have spread from coast to coast, although not many people alive today have actually been inside one. At the height of pre-war civilization, the government and a few powerful corporations knew that an apocalypse was brewing, so they used their finest technology to create vast subterranean bunkers that could withstand a nuclear blast, a meteor impact, global flooding, or other likely disasters. The general public wasn't entirely convinced that their end was nigh. Otherwise, there would have been a greater demand for vaults. When the war started, there were only about 100 of them scattered across America, and many held less than the 1,000 people they were intended to hold. Those who were smart enough or lucky enough to be inside one when the end came were protected from the devastation by airtight steel doors, thick walls of concrete, and over 200 feet of soil. The fine engineers at Vault-Tec designed their bunkers to run independently for 10 years and even more. Geothermal power, hydroponic farms for growing food, and a water purification system so efficient vault residents could fool themselves into thinking they weren't drinking their own urine. The designers made the vaults as homey as possible despite the steel-clad walls. The cafeterias were designed to look a little like roadside diners, and vault dwellers could close their eyes and imagine that they were eating a plate of Blamco mac and cheese. Shiny new medical robots tended to those who suffered from mundane illnesses and injuries, while on the surface world, billions died from radiation sickness, burns, starvation, and violence. Housing wasn't as spacious as on the surface, but there was plenty of room for several hundred people, and the vaults that held a few thousand or more could work out fair ways to share their bunks for a while. Each vault was run by a leader called the Overseer, who ran the underground community from a command center deep inside the complex. The Overseers were usually selected for their exceptional leadership skills. The vaults were comfortable enough, but after 10 years the radiation had gone down in most parts of the country, and the vault dwellers expected to head back up into the sunlight and begin rebuilding their flawed societies. Vault-Tec had prepared them for anything that might await on the surface. The vaults had all the research material that they would need to rebuild America, including the entire Library of Congress on holodisk, plus 101 recipes on how to cook rats. Those who have walked the wasteland know that the world isn't a kind place. Sometimes people think of the pre-war days as a golden age, a time when people were better to each other. But there wouldn't have been an apocalypse if that were true. No, people were cruel and callous to each other even back then, and the folks who ran Vault-Tec were no exception. We've all heard of Vault City, a paradise built by the people who emerged from Vault 8 using a pre-war device called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit. They represent what the world could have been like if only Project Safehouse had been on the up and up. Unfortunately, Vault-Tec had some ulterior motives, and vaults like Vault 8 were rare. The poor fools who weathered the fallout in Vault-Tec's nuclear shelters were the control groups in horrible experiments. Keep people nice and safe for 10 years, then open up and build a new Garden of Eden? That happened a few times out of 100 vaults. Most vaults were designed to deliberately malfunction as part of an experiment to see just how far the human mind could be pushed before it snapped. Unbeknownst to the vault dwellers, Vault-Tec and some elite factions of the government had their own shelters far away from the public vaults. These elite wanted to learn how to rebuild society by observing the inhabitants of the defective vaults. Some of the vaults were designed so that their inhabitants would be trapped in isolation for generations. Think 10 years locked in a vault is a rough trip? Try 80 or 200. There could even be people still sealed inside hidden vaults that haven't opened yet. Other vaults had experiments that only a lunatic could conceive. 1,000 men with only one woman. 1,000 women with just one man. Or even one man trapped all alone in his own vault with nothing but a crate of puppets for company. One vault even seemed like it was designed as a personal playground for a sadistic Vault-Tec employee who just wanted some poor souls to suffer forever in a virtual reality where he was a god in a world of his own making. You might be wondering if the vault dwellers ever figured out what was happening to them. Did any of them learn that their lives meant nothing to Vault-Tec, that they had become no more than lab rats in a mad experiment? Maybe the inhabitants thought that their problems were accidental supply errors. Or maybe they realized what had happened and cursed Vault-Tec with their dying breaths. Who knows if these experiments turned up any useful information for the sons of whores who devised them. But all the suffering wasn't for nothing. Many vaults did open, even if later than expected. Some of the people who emerged went on to do great things for the wasteland. Parts of what used to be the capital of this land even has fresh water thanks to some helpful vault dwellers and technology scavenged from the old vaults. Looters hoping to uncover riches and pre-war supplies should be wary of the vaults, though. Project Safehouse has brought some troubles to the wasteland, too. The super mutants, for instance, are connected to the corporation behind the vaults. Just remember, Wanderer, it isn't worth getting killed by mutants just because you heard about a stash of fancy lad snack cakes inside some old vault's pantry. There's a whole city of ghouls who came from one of the vaults. Sometimes you'll meet a ghoul who claims to have been alive back before the bombs fell. Don't pay them no mind, unless they're wearing a Vault 12 jumpsuit. That vault, the door never sealed up all the way. Maybe it malfunctioned, or maybe it was more of Vault-Tec's shenanigans. But the people inside got just the right dose of radiation to turn into the very first ghouls. The idea of a piece of the old world sealed fresh is just too romantic an idea for some people to resist. Of course, most wanderers have the sense to stay away from the vaults. If you really can't help yourself, though, there's a city called New Vegas where people can get a look at the inside of a real live vault without having to worry about mutants, ghouls, or old security bots. Right in the middle of the New Vegas Strip is an old vault that they turned into a hotel so that travelers have some place to sleep while they waste their caps boozing, gambling, and whoring. Tourists can even grab a Vault-Tec lunchbox in mint condition or a stylish vintage Vault 21 jumpsuit. We don't know how many vaults are still out there undiscovered. They're hidden well, and Vault-Tec like keeping their secrets. Maybe a few of these unknown vaults still have people living inside, the descendants of that first group of survivors. Or maybe there's a thriving society buried right under our feet that doesn't even wonder what the outside world is like. Sooner or later, though, that door has to open. Even the fine makers of the vaults couldn't build a system that will contain humanity forever. And when those vault dwellers take their first steps out into the bright sunlight and feel the sands of the wasteland beneath their feet, they'll find the world has changed a lot in 200 years. It's a big, mean world. Their overseer is small potatoes compared to some of the factions that run things now. There are those who view the vaults as candy-shelled morsels filled with treats. Technology is nice, but the vaults held something even more precious. A pure gene pool uncontaminated by radiation or exposure to virus-borne mutagens. There are plenty of interested parties who want to get their hands on a fresh supply of pure strain humans who have yet to be exposed to the harsh wasteland. But that is a story for another day. You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning.
Vault-Tec presents Tomorrow's Technology Today. At Vault-Tec, we're more than just America's first choice in vault technology. Thanks to military science, we're also your first choice in personal defense. Upon leaving the vault, you may find your neighbors on the surface have changed a lot while you were away. Little Sally Sue, for instance, is gone, and in her place we see Mr. Scary. Mr. Scary is not our friend. Here at Vault-Tec, your safety is our #1 concern, so we're here to help any post-nuclear nuisance go away. Introducing the Mutant Blaster R88, the latest in mutation-removing technology. Simply point this patented device in the direction of the threat, pull the easy-to-use trigger, and watch as Mr. Scary goes away. Forever. Results may vary.
When the Great War annihilated civilization, the survivors lost their loved ones, their homes, and their worldly goods. They endured a daily search for food, water, and medicine. They also had to seek out their lost identities. People have always defined themselves by the work they do, the place they live, the things they own. In the Great War, it wasn't just buildings that were destroyed. Entire cultures were erased from history. In the brutal years that followed, the survivors had to define themselves again, find meaning in their existence, or face a metaphorical loss of their humanity. But a much more literal threat to their humanity was already in place, waiting quietly beneath the desert for someone to stumble across it. Someone did, nearly a century after the war, and that threat came closer to extinguishing humanity than all the bombs and guns of the old wars. A single neutron passing through a strand of DNA can cause a cancerous tumor, but a lifetime of exposure to unprecedented amounts of atomic fallout will have wildly unpredictable results. After a few generations of passing on this defective DNA, a species will begin to mutate. That explains many of the strange beasts running around the wasteland, but not all of them. There's a different strain of mutant out there. They're shaped like men, but bigger. Some of them are more dangerous than deathclaws, stronger than a man in power armor. They call themselves super mutants, and they're not the result of random contact with radiation, but rather a deliberate act of genetic tampering. Holotapes unearthed in pre-war military installations show that the United States government started out with good intentions. Rival nations had attacked America with biological weapons, resulting in a new plague, so America's leaders created their own defensive virus. The plan, originally, was to make a germ that would mutate America's population just enough that they would become immune to the viruses that the enemy might use. In a sense, this forced evolutionary virus worked, but the effects were much more drastic than anticipated. The animal test subjects mutated by it were not only resistant to common biological weapons, they also grew stronger and more intelligent, but monstrously deformed. In Maryland, the virus was placed in a Vault-Tec vault and used as part of their cruel experiments. According to files recovered from a Vault-Tec mainframe, the people who took shelter in that vault were exposed to the virus by their own overseer, the very man assigned to protect them after the bombs fell. After escaping the war, these people suffered even worse than those trapped on the surface. The mutation process is painful, and most people exposed to the virus die a horrible death in a body they don't even recognize as their own. Those who do survive often wish they hadn't, because their very humanity is taken from them. Whatever they look like before mutating, they transform into an enormous, bald, green brute. That sudden loss of identity would enrage almost anyone. Maybe with enough therapy, a person could come to terms with their new body. But most of the poor creatures suffered from another side effect: reduced cognitive capability. Despite the virus's potential to increase intelligence in some people, most of the super mutants on the East Coast were just plain stupid. In fact, many of their brains were too small to perform even basic autonomic functions like breathing. For those that survived, there were some positive trade-offs. Their strength increased tremendously, as did their size. Even the small ones are nearly 10 feet tall. In the capital wasteland, these beasts continue growing throughout their existence. Wanderers have reported fighting super mutants that are 15 feet tall, and foolhardy adventurers have pumped hundreds of bullets from assault rifles into mutant overlords without bringing them down. Scouts from the Brotherhood of Steel even claim to have fought super mutants that are 20 feet tall and can survive a direct hit from a mini-nuke. The only factor that keeps them in check is that they are infertile and cannot reproduce, at least not the way that they did when they were still human. The first mutants created in that horrid vault might not have been as intelligent as the humans who created them, but they had strength and righteous fury on their side. The mutants turned on their creators and transformed them into the next generation of super mutants. And in time, the vault was nothing but mutants, alone, undying, and just intelligent enough to know that they had been betrayed by humanity. Forcibly stripped of their humanity, robbed of their ability to reason, and transformed into massive brutes, they were an angry horde trapped inside a vault. Rage and boredom are an unstable mixture, and eventually that vault burst. Hundreds of super mutants emerged into a wasteland where their enhanced physical abilities made them better suited to survive than the humans around them. The disorganized humans had only one advantage, and that was their numerical superiority. Outnumbered and unable to breed, the mutants were still cunning enough to understand that they had to boost their ranks by kidnapping humans and exposing them to the virus. Further west, things were more complicated. California and the West Coast had their share of trouble with super mutants, but those mutants, they didn't just suddenly pop out of a vault and rampage like mindless savages. The mutants of the Wasteland's core region were the result of a misguided plan to set the world right. The mutant army was smart enough to scour the lands for new humans to mutate, and to select people with little exposure to radiation. Using humans with DNA undamaged by radioactivity meant they were more likely to keep their intelligence after mutating. The size and capability of this inhuman swarm grew, always hungering for the purest human DNA to serve as the building blocks of a master race. This was before the new California Republic had solidified, before the Enclave chose to reveal itself, back when the Brotherhood of Steel kept their technology closely guarded. There was nothing to stand against an army with such organization, such single-mindedness, such unity. Who they had been before no longer mattered. The super mutants weren't divided by old-world notions of race, and they did not bicker over religious beliefs, for they all worshipped the same dark god and claimed that they could hear his voice in their heads. Did this dark god exist? Were the mutants led by some cunning mutant general? Could the master race have a master of its own? Someone or something was certainly behind this new unity movement. No doubt, through much trial and error, this dark god created generations of flawed beasts before finally discovering that the FEV works most effectively on people who have low levels of radiation exposure. Access to pre-war computers revealed that the wasteland held secret communities of uncontaminated vault dwellers whose gene pools had been protected for generations deep beneath the earth where the radioactive fallout couldn't reach them. It's ironic that the super mutant master was done in by the actions of one of these vault dwellers. Regardless of how it happened, with their master gone, the mutant army scattered. The former elite guard of the mutant army have taken the fall of their master the hardest and have become an unpredictable menace. These Nightkin, as they call themselves, were once the best of their species, augmenting their strength and cunning with pre-war stealth technology. They are usually still in possession of the rare Stealth Boy devices and use them without concern for the harmful effects of prolonged exposure. After decades of constant use, their minds have degenerated and their skin is darkened to a distinctive gray. They're plagued by hallucinations and imaginary friends. Often their jabbering is the only sign that one is nearby. Due to their tendency to appear in unexpected places and engage in bizarre behavior, a single Nightkin can be more dangerous than a group of their green-skinned brethren. Some super mutants have formed their own communities, following charismatic leaders across the wasteland. Turn a radio to the right frequency in the right parts of Nevada, and there's a broadcast coming from a mutant girl who thinks she can take the master's place and guide the mutants to a new utopia. Although she has gathered many followers, her mental instability ensures that this is unlikely. Some wanderers even speak of outright friendly super mutant companions who accompany them as friends and equals. Given their resilience and long lives, these benevolent creatures could still be out there looking for new adventures and traveling companions. A few diverse communities consisting of humans, ghouls, and mutants alike have popped up, at least for a time. Despite the best efforts to get along, it seems that differences will always reduce people to fighting among themselves. Perhaps that dark god was right, and what the wasteland really needs is more unity. If the super mutants do ever form another army, they're likely to find the wasteland a little more of a challenge this time around. Since their master fell, the world has become a more crowded place, and there are other, better-equipped factions of humanity ready to challenge any newcomers for the spoils of the old world. But that is a story for another day. You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning. A wise soldier knows that it isn't the weapon that matters most, but the hand that wields it. An army equipped with the finest weapons certainly has the advantage in battle. But what happens when the battle is over? Over the millennia, the tools of war have changed. From bronze to iron, then steel, and eventually plutonium. Mankind grows ever more capable of waging war, and always less capable of using those weapons responsibly. There are those who feel that no one is responsible enough to wield power such as mankind had during the Great War. And then there are those who feel that they alone are worthy. Travelers and merchants in the wasteland have seen towering soldiers in suits of metal armor marching off to battle with laser rifles slung over their shoulders. These are members of the Brotherhood of Steel, It is easy to distinguish them from other armored warriors by their pre-war power armor. Those T-51B armored suits aren't just plates of metal strapped to their bodies. No, the Brotherhood of Steel's armor is a fusion-powered artifact designed before the Great War. It augments their strength, protects them from harm, and marks them as members of an elite order. The Brotherhood of Steel is among the most technologically advanced factions that the Wasteland holds. They are relatively few in number when compared to vast armies like the New California Republic or the Legion. What the Brotherhood lacks in numbers, they make up for in raw power and indomitable courage. The Brotherhood can trace its history back to the Great War. Long before the military base in Mariposa, California gave rise to the Super Mutant Army, it was a research facility. In the days leading up to the Great War, there was a small contingent of soldiers assigned to guard the base and its loathsome contents. That loyal band of men didn't know they were protecting a horribly unethical group of scientists who were engaging in unfathomable experiments. They only knew that it was an important project, that they were there doing their part to fight the good fight and keep their country safe. Eventually, they did learn the awful truth of the forced evolutionary virus, that the base they were guarding was being used to experiment on human test subjects, inmates from military prisons. The knowledge that they unknowingly participated in these atrocities, committed on their own brothers in arms no less, stretched their loyalty to the breaking point. Colonel Spindell, their commanding officer, was unable to cope with this fact. Just a few days after the truth was revealed, he committed suicide, leaving his second command, Captain Roger Maxson, to deal with the aftermath. Today, the Brotherhood looks up to Roger Maxson with religious reverence. Perhaps Maxson was destined to carry the fire of humanity, or he may have simply had the right balance of honor and pragmatism needed to lead men through the apocalypse. Maxson took it upon himself to take control of the base, ordering the interrogations of the science teams to maintain a semblance of order. As he started to believe that the project was backed knowingly by his government, he attempted to contact his superiors for a response, even going so far as to declare secession from the Union. At the same time, he and his soldiers then gathered their families with them and readied themselves inside their remote base. They waited for a response, any kind of response, anticipating that their own government would never tolerate such an outright insurrection and would have to come and provide answers. But the response never came. Unbeknownst to Maxson, the Great War was already brewing, even as he staged his revolt. If anyone in the government knew about Maxson's rebellion, they no longer cared. The base at Mariposa proved to be a reliable shelter against the onslaught of the atomic war. Maxson, his loyal troops, and their families were among the survivors. His own wife and son were at Maxson's side, and the understanding that his children would live in whatever world he left behind must surely have influenced his actions in the days ahead. Humanity is a stubborn species, not one to die out easily, but mankind's knowledge, civilization, and technology could easily disappear once living memory had passed. Would Captain Maxson's descendants run barefoot through the desert, hunting food with stone spears? Or would they stride through the wasteland clad in power armor, felling their enemies with beams of light and fire? It was not a difficult choice to make as Maxson led his troops and their families from the Mariposa base to a hidden military bunker in what is now called the Lost Hills. There they used what materials they had gathered to build a place of refuge and learning. They preserved their military discipline and technological knowledge from generation to generation, carrying the fire, even if it was hidden beneath the desert. The Brotherhood limited their contact with other communities of survivors, primarily trading for food and other essentials with technology they recovered or made. Sequestered with their precious laser rifles, computers, and power armor, they kept the most fragile of old-world technologies alive, but hoarded that knowledge to themselves. The tribal societies on the surface that had saved pre-war equipment found it wearing out over time. Spare parts were used up, and no one had the capacity to manufacture anything new. As the years turned to decades, technology grew more and more rare. The understanding of how to use it began to disappear, even as people learned how to hunt with spears and cook rad scorpions. In time, Maxson's son assumed command as the High Elder, and his son after him. Other respected members of the Brotherhood form a council of elders beneath the High Elder, who has traditionally been a descendant of the Maxson line, although sometimes the role of High Elder has fallen to a distinguished paladin. Life within the Brotherhood still uses elements of the pre-war American military, with a strict hierarchical structure. Although there are many ranks within the Brotherhood, The three main branches of the organization are the scribes, the knights, and the paladins. Scribes are responsible for scientific research and preservation of ancient knowledge. At one point, they focused their efforts on preservation, but the Brotherhood has grown less concerned with chronicling history than with the development of new weaponry. The title of knight once referred to armored warriors who fought battles while mounted on an extinct species of animal called a horse. Those knights are a far cry from the knights of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood, a knight is responsible for building, repairing, and maintaining the weapons designed by the scribes. Should a knight distinguish themselves, they can eventually become a paladin. The majority of the Brotherhood personnel seen by outsiders are paladins. These elite soldiers cut a swath through the raiders, mutants, and tribal barbarians that stand between the Brotherhood and the technology they desire. While the Brotherhood is eager to fight any bandits or raiders that they come across, they're reluctant to assist the residents of the wasteland in any significant manner. They view most outsiders as intellectual inferiors, unfit to receive technological assistance. Many people have attempted to join the Brotherhood, only to be sent on a suicidal errand to recover artifacts from heavily irradiated regions of the wasteland. Their arrogance has nearly been their undoing on several occasions. When the super mutant menace appeared, Brotherhood scribes were the first to determine that they were a new form of mutant and a clear threat. Yet, it was not a Brotherhood paladin that defeated the mutants. It was a mere wanderer accompanied by a mongrel dog. Much later, the Brotherhood's view that they alone should be allowed to control the wasteland's technology led them to wage a brutal war against the powerful new California Republic. Despite their technological advantage, the Brotherhood lost the war. Nowhere was this defeat more severe than in the Mojave Wasteland. Garrisoned at a pre-war solar power station, the elder of the Mojave chapter attempted to unlock its dark secrets to use against the NCR in the war. But before he could do so, the NCR forced a confrontation. Outnumbered 10-1, the Brotherhood was forced to retreat after losing half the chapter and the disappearance of their elder. The defeat at Helios was a crippling blow for the Brotherhood. After that, the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood left the NCR alone and retreated back to their old base in Hidden Valley. There they can tend to their computers and ray guns as much as they like. They still send the occasional paladin up to the surface to procure crucial supplies, but recent years have proven to be a challenging time for the Brotherhood. Sometimes individuals will leave the Brotherhood for extended periods, often to procure rare resources, but occasionally just so the Brotherhood can discreetly get rid of rebellious youth. Wanderers who prove themselves worthy just might find themselves with a Brotherhood member as a traveling companion for a while. They can demonstrate that their cause is of value to the Brotherhood. And, well, maybe a few travelers will warm themselves by a campfire and let an old scribe tell his tales of the wild wasteland to anyone who will listen. Although the Brotherhood of Steel has seen better days, they are nonetheless a pivotal factor in conflicts affecting the core regions. Records back at Lost Hill show that there's also a disavowed branch of the Brotherhood who struck out east and took it upon themselves to defend the nation's former capital from the super mutants. But that is a story for another day. You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning.
It's not just the strength to lead, but the strength to follow. Not just strength in numbers, but the strength of brothers. There is nothing on this green earth stronger than the Brotherhood of Steel, because there is nothing on this green earth stronger than Lady Liberty. Democracy is non-negotiable. Join the Brotherhood. Courage today, victory tomorrow.
The wasteland stretches from one horizon to the other, and very few people can say that they have walked it all. If a traveler sets out from the boneyard on the west coast and walks towards the rising sun in the east, it would take months before they reach the other ocean. It used to take a lot less time. Some of the old flight records at airfields say that people would fly back and forth across the entire country in an afternoon. Not many of those flying vehicles made it through the Great War intact, and the people who use them aren't likely to take on passengers. The roads used to be smoother, and people built a steel bridge over every little river that got in their way. Even when folks didn't have the time to fly from one city to the next, they could still communicate over great distances. At the time of the Great War, this was done through wireless satellite transmissions, but even 400 years ago, people could communicate all the way across the country with a network of wires that were strung up on poles that lined the highways and railroad tracks. Some of those poles are still standing today, but the wires don't go anywhere anymore. So today, if you want to know what's happening on the other side of the horizon, there's only one way to find out. Go see for yourself. Lots of people go their whole lives without traveling more than a few days' walk from the village where they were born. But for organizations like the Brotherhood of Steel, long-distance travel and communication are on the front burner. The Brotherhood of Steel has taken it upon themselves to preserve the technology of the old world. There's plenty of old gizmos and gadgets out in New California, but the truth is, the capital of this nation used to be out on the East Coast. A few decades ago, in 2254, the Brotherhood dispatched a military contingent to the east to recover advanced technologies from cities and bases dotting the eastern seaboard. The Brotherhood sent teams east before, to Chicago, and some folks say they planned a mission to Boston. The Capital Expedition was one of the most ambitious projects the Brotherhood had ever undertaken. A promising paladin named Owen Lyons was chosen to lead a force that would learn what had become of Washington and the surrounding area. After months on the road, the first reports from Lyons weren't promising. They passed through a hellhole that was appropriately named the Pit. This pit of human misery fared worse than most after the Great War. Pittsburgh is what they used to call it back then. Lyons led a scourge of the city, killing any who fought back. Something was recovered that day, but only the Elder knows what it was. When the Brotherhood left the desolate city behind, the caravan carried 20 unmutated children saved by the troops. This was the first of many unconventional moves from Paladin Lyons. He not only rescued those children, but he defied tradition and made them initiates in the Brotherhood. Most of the people in the Brotherhood are born into it, descended from their ancestors that helped form the Order 2 centuries earlier. Taking in an outsider is extremely rare for any Brotherhood chapter, but to recruit a group of children descended from irradiated scavengers and slaves, to some, that made Lyons a hero. To others, a pragmatic leader who needed the extra hands, and a few people saw him as a mongrel-loving traitor to the Brotherhood. The Capital Expedition didn't stop with the Pit. They pressed on into a region called Maryland, fighting raiders and slavers wherever they found them, until they came to what was once the capital city of this land. And what they found didn't fill them with hope. Aside from slavers, raiders, and feral ghouls, there are also some of the biggest super mutants they'd ever seen. All of them full of rage and ready to attack on sight. This was nearly 100 years after the Master's super mutant army had been scattered, and Washington had the worst infestation of them Lyons and his soldiers had seen. The disorganized band of humans were no match for the mutants. Out east, people live in pathetic little villages built in the ruins of highway on-ramps, the basements of pre-war monuments, and even some crazy folks who built a town out of the husk of a bomber plane, complete with a nuclear bomb right in the middle of town. There was no organization that could stand against the mutants. The Brotherhood fought their way into the center of Washington, hoping that some remnants of the old world government might be there. But the whole town was mutants through and through, dug in right in front of museums that housed priceless artifacts from the old days. Mutants walking the halls of the old Capitol building, where great men and women once wrote the laws that defined their civilization. And the biggest letdown of all was a funny little building with 5 sides. Used to be the headquarters of America's military, back when the military was all that mattered. Lions found the building had been hit pretty hard. Just 5 crumbling walls around a courtyard, and that's when the Brotherhood's luck turned. Those folks that built this Pentagon built parts of it to last. And deep inside the roots of that building, the Brotherhood found a treasure trove of pre-war intel, equipment, weapons, killer robot. His name was Liberty Prime. He was built to instill fear in the hearts of America's enemies 200 years ago. Liberty Prime could crush a soldier in power armor. He could throw nuclear bombs like footballs, and his eyes fired beams of electric death. All the while, he spouted propaganda to terrify his communist foes and inspire his allies. He was the best toy any Brotherhood scribe could ask for. Liberty Prime never got to fight the commies he hated so much. A machine that big with integrated energy weapons and computing power to control it all autonomously, it was too much even for America's most fanciful engineers. It took the Brotherhood's most brilliant scribes 20 years to get the thing running. Lyons and his followers fought a hard war of attrition against the super mutant scourge that plagued Washington. They built up the ruins of the old Pentagon into a fortress that they called the Citadel. They recruited the locals to bolster their ranks and built up the finest army that Washington had seen in 200 years. The goal of plundering pre-war military installations became less important to Lyons. How to best defend the people around him filled his waking thoughts. In time, some members of the Brotherhood felt that Lyons had abandoned their original goal of recovering the lost technologies of America's capital. That included the main chapter of the Brotherhood back west, but also some of Lyons' own men. These men abandoned Lyons, formed a band of outcasts, a name they wear proudly to this day. These outcasts took over a pre-war military base on the outskirts of the city. From there, they keep up the Brotherhood's original mission of gathering rare technologies from around Washington, D.C. They dream of one day marching right back to the Lost Hills, their arms filled with shiny new gizmos, and rejoining the rest of the Brotherhood as heroes. Travelers can identify the outcasts by their black and red armor. They don't care for Lyons' knight in shining armor sensibilities, so they even abandon traditional Brotherhood titles like Knight and Paladin. Instead, they use ranks like Defender and Protector. Maybe this change was intended to reflect that they're defending the ideals of the Brotherhood, or protecting technology from the savages of the Wasteland. But they certainly aren't defending the people of the Capital Wasteland. They'll fight off any raiders they come across, and super mutants too. But do not mistake these actions for altruism. When the outcasts clear out a slaver camp, or a nest of feral ghouls, this is only because it furthers the outcasts' cause in some way. They view most people of the Wasteland as ignorant cavemen, unfit to touch a plasma pistol. You do not want to become a problem for them, because they have a knack dealing with problems rather divisively. Their weapons and equipment are among the best available in the Wasteland, and their patrols are augmented with combat robots that pack a mean punch. These two factions of the Brotherhood and the Capital Wasteland tend to stay away from each other, but travelers don't want to be anywhere nearby when these cats meet. The sad thing is, the average settler can't tell the difference between the Brotherhood and the outcasts. They're all just people in armored suits shooting each other with ray guns. To most people in the Capital Wasteland, the politics don't matter. They don't care who's killing the mutants and raiders. They just want the trade caravans to run on time. Maybe that's why the citizens of the Capital Wasteland didn't make that much of a fuss when the Enclave set up shop in the capital as well. To them, the Enclave was just another group of tin soldiers with laser rifles talking high ideals. How does someone scavenging through a pile of rusty cans tell the difference? To the average Wastelander, the Enclave's propaganda machine is something to disregard. All just words to someone who won't make it through the night without a dose of Radaway. The Brotherhood of Steel knew the Enclave was trouble right from the start, and eventually went head-to-head with them in a battle unlike anything seen before, even if the Wastelanders didn't understand why they were fighting. But that is a story for another day. You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, To get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning. As far as anyone knows, this wasteland is the best damned wasteland in the world. When America and China went head-to-head 200 years ago, both sides launched everything they had, and most people assumed that China was blasted back to the Stone Age. The only way to know for sure is to jump in a boat and paddle across the ocean, so folks just assume that China, Europe, Canada, and the rest of the world got hit at least as bad as America did. People look out at this land, and some of them just know in their hearts that it's the garden spot of the whole world. Maybe that's why we can't go more than a few decades without someone trying to take over the place. When humanity was just beginning the struggle to rebuild after the war, there was no sign of the government helping out. People formed tribes led by the strongest warriors and the smartest scavengers. The chain of command and the line of succession meant nothing to people who needed things done fast. The closest thing to a government that emerged was tribal elders, or the mayors of small villages. Eventually, in 2189, some of the larger towns in California banded together and formed the new California Republic, but they never claimed to be the government. With no communications from the pre-war government for over a century, the memory of it faded as new generations replaced the old, convinced the old president and his kind were long dead, but the wasteland ain't so lucky. 200 years ago, the last days before the Great War, a secret coterie of America's top-ranking political and corporate leaders decided to duck and cover, big time. They scurried right off the continent, hid inside a secret offshore base, then cowered there while the rest of the country suffered a nuclear holocaust the government had caused. There they stayed, safe and hidden for decades. The group we know today as the Enclave is the result of 10 generations of breeding between politicians, military brass, and corporate executives. The direct descendants of the people who caused the apocalypse? Not many people would make up a story like that, so it's probably safe to take them at their word about their ancestors. Regardless of who their great-grandparents were, the Enclave certainly has access to an abundance of pre-war tech and weapons. They hoarded it on a man-made island, a metal city that grew out of the ocean floor. It was once used to refine oil, back when people could pull oil right out of the bottom of the sea. The Poseidon oil rig was inaccessible to people on the mainland, so no one knew they were out there until they began their plan to rid the wasteland of everyone who didn't fit their